Step away from the truck, hands on the hood, now.
I'm here for my son. Tell me what crime you think I committed.
You match a bolo. Reach for anything and you're going down.
I'm reaching for my wallet slowly, and you're about to assault a disabled combat veteran on camera.
Agent Derek Vance had been with Immigration and Customs Enforcement for just over 4 years when he made the decision that would implode his career and cost the taxpayers of his city $3.4 million. He was 29 years old, aggressive and driven by a metric-based ambition that often blurred the lines between law enforcement and harassment. He operated with a simple, flawed philosophy. Everyone is guilty of something. You just have to shake them hard enough to find out what it is. On a crisp Tuesday afternoon in October, outside the manicured grounds of Oak Hill Academy, Vance received a tip from a nervous school administrator about a military-aged male lurking near the student parking lot. The man in question was Marcus Thorne, a retired Marine Master Sergeant and a decorated combat veteran. What Vance did next, ignoring Thorne's demeanor, dismissing his identification, and sweeping a wounded war hero to the asphalt in front of parents and faculty, would become a definitive case study in how unchecked authority and implicit bias can shatter the public trust. Before we get into the details of this afternoon, let me ask you, where are you joining us from today? If you believe that our veterans deserve better than to be treated like criminals in the country they served, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We tell these stories because the truth matters, and your support helps us keep the spotlight where it belongs. Oak Hill Academy sits on a quiet, tree-lined boulevard in the suburbs, the kind of place where tuition rivals the average national income and the lawns are manicured with surgical precision. It was 2:15 p.m. The autumn sun was bright, casting long shadows across the brick facade of the main building. The pickup line hadn't fully formed yet, but early arrivals were idling in their luxury SUVs, checking emails and waiting for the final bell. Marcus Thorne had arrived 10 minutes early. He parked his pristine charcoal gray pickup truck in the designated waiting zone, stepped out to stretch his legs, and leaned against the driver's side door. At 48 years old, Marcus Thorne cut an imposing figure. He stood 6'2", with the kind of posture you can't fake and you can't buy. It has to be drilled into you over decades of morning formations. He wore a simple navy blue polo shirt tucked into khaki cargo pants and sturdy leather boots. He was waiting for his youngest son, a senior, who was wrapping up football practice. Thorne wasn't bothering anyone. He wasn't speaking to anyone. He was simply existing, enjoying the crisp fall air, checking his watch with the patience of a man who had spent hours waiting in transport planes and desert convoys. But to the eyes watching him from the second-floor administrative office, Marcus Thorne didn't look like a parent. He looked like a threat. Marcus Thorne was not a man who rattled easily. You don't survive 22 years in the United States Marine Corps by panicking when things get quiet. Thorne had enlisted at 18, right out of high school, driven by a sense of duty that had run in his family for 3 generations. He had served in the infantry, moving up the ranks through sheer competence and grit. He'd done 2 tours in Fallujah. He'd lost friends. He'd taken shrapnel in his left leg from an IED blast that earned him a Purple Heart and a permanent aching stiffness when the rain set in. After retiring with the rank of Master Sergeant, he hadn't slowed down. He transitioned into a high-level logistics consulting role for a defense contractor. He held a security clearance that was higher than most of the federal agents operating in the state. Thorne was a man of routine and discipline. He valued order. He taught his children that respect was earned, that the law was to be followed, and that character was defined by what you did when no one was watching. He was a pillar of his church and a volunteer at the local VA hospital. But none of that history was visible to Greg Miller. Greg Miller was 34 years old, the newly appointed vice principal of Oak Hill Academy. He was a man who prided himself on vigilance. He had come from a corporate security background before moving into education administration, and he treated the high school less like a place of learning and more like a fortress under constant siege. Miller had been on the job for only 6 months, but he had already developed a reputation among the staff for being high-strung and overly suspicious of anyone who didn't fit the specific demographic mold of the Oak Hill clientele. From his window, Miller watched Thorne. He didn't see a father. He didn't see a veteran. He saw a black man with a muscular build standing next to a truck that Miller didn't recognize, despite Thorne having picked his son up from this exact spot for 3 years. Miller's mind began to race, filling in the blanks with worst-case scenarios. He had seen a bulletin earlier that week from a regional task force about a fugitive wanted for trafficking a vague description that matched Thorne only in broad strokes: tall, heavy build, potentially armed. Miller squinted through the blinds. Thorne crossed his arms, his biceps straining against the fabric of his polo. To Miller, that wasn't a man resting. That was a man posturing. That was a lookout. Instead of walking outside to ask the man if he needed help or simply checking the vehicle registration against the student-parent database, Miller decided to escalate. He wanted to be the hero who intercepted a danger before it entered the school grounds. He picked up his phone and bypassed the local police non-emergency line, dialing a direct contact he had at the Regional Federal Task Force, a number meant for serious active threats. "This is Greg Miller at Oak Hill. We have a situation," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There is a suspicious individual loitering near the student lot. He matches the description of that fugitive from the bulletin. He's military-aged, black male, aggressive posture. I need someone here now before the students come out." The call was routed to Agent Derek Vance. If you were to look at Vance's personnel file, you would see a portrait of an officer who was dangerous precisely because he technically followed the rules, he just bent them until they snapped. In his 4 years with the agency, Vance had racked up impressive numbers. He was a stats guy. He measured his success in detainments and interrogations. But behind the numbers was a trail of complaints that had been systematically swept under the rug. There were 7 formal grievances filed against him. 4 involved profiling. 3 involved excessive use of force. Vance had a reputation for what his colleagues called fishing. He would find a pretext to stop someone, a broken taillight, loitering suspicious behavior, and then escalate the encounter until he found a reason to make an arrest. He believed that if you pressed hard enough, everyone would crack. His supervisors, under pressure to show high activity metrics, often looked the other way. "Vance gets results," they would say in performance reviews, ignoring the fact that his results were often built on the violation of civil liberties. When the call came in from Oak Hill Academy, Vance didn't hear "check out a parent." He heard "fugitive." He heard "career-making arrest." He was sitting in his unmarked SUV with his partner, a rookie named Sarah Jenkins, who was only 3 months out of the academy. Jenkins was still learning the ropes, often deferring to Vance's experience, a dynamic that Vance exploited to validate his aggressive tactics. "We got a live one," Vance said, throwing the car into gear. "Oak Hill. Administrator says he matches the bolo for the interstate trafficker." "The guy from the briefing?" Jenkins asked, checking her computer terminal. "That suspect is listed as having a scar on his left cheek and tattoos on his neck. Did the caller confirm that?" "Caller said he matches. That's enough for a Terry stop," Vance said, cutting the siren but accelerating hard. "We catch him before he runs. If this is him, we're looking at a commendation." They arrived at the school in 12 minutes. Vance swung the SUV around the corner and killed the engine 100 feet from where Thorne was standing. Through the windshield, Vance stared at the man. Thorne was still leaning against his truck, checking his phone, now looking completely at ease. Most fugitives are nervous. They look around. They pace. They keep the engine running. Thorne was doing none of that. But Vance didn't see calmness. He saw arrogance. He saw a criminal who thought he was untouchable. "He's big," Vance muttered, unbuckling his seatbelt. "Watch his hands. If he reaches for anything, you draw." "He's just standing there, Derek," Jenkins said, a note of hesitation in her voice. "He's right in the pickup lane. Maybe we should run the plate first." "No time. If he sees us run the plate, he bolts. We take control of the situation immediately. That's how you stay alive." Vance opened his door and stepped out, his hand already resting on the grip of his holstered weapon. He adjusted his sunglasses, set his jaw, and began to march toward Thorne. He didn't walk like a peace officer looking to investigate. He walked like a soldier entering a combat zone. Marcus Thorne looked up as the two agents approached. He had spent enough time in conflict zones to recognize body language, and what he saw in Derek Vance was aggression. Thorne straightened up, taking his hands out of his pockets slowly and deliberately keeping them visible. It was a survival instinct honed in checkpoints from Fallujah to Ramadi. He didn't know who these men were. They were in plain clothes with tactical vests that said "Police" in yellow letters, but they weren't local PD. Vance stopped 10 feet away, creating a tactical gap. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask for a name. He barked an order. "Step away from the vehicle, hands where I can see them." Thorne didn't flinch. He kept his hands at chest level, palms open. "I'm right here, officer. My hands are visible. I'm waiting for my son. Is there a problem?" "I said step away from the vehicle." Vance shouted, his voice echoing off the brick walls of the school. "Turn around and place your hands on the hood. Now." "I need to know why I'm being detained," Thorne said, his voice calm, deep, and resonant. It was the voice of a man who had commanded platoons. "I am a parent at this school. I'm legally parked. I have identification right here in my back pocket. I don't care who you say you are. You match the description of a wanted fugitive. Now for the last time, get on the hood or I will put you on the hood." Vance closed the distance, his hand tightening on his weapon. The rookie Jenkins looked uncomfortable. She glanced around. A few parents in other cars had rolled down their windows. A teacher walking across the lawn had stopped to watch. This was a public spectacle, and the man they were shouting at didn't look like a criminal. He looked like a statue of dignity. Thorne held his ground, not out of defiance, but out of principle. He knew his rights. "Officer, I am a retired Master Sergeant of the United States Marine Corps. I am going to reach into my back right pocket and remove my wallet to show you my ID. I am doing this slowly." "Do not reach." Vance lunged forward. "I am informing you of my actions." Thorne set his eyes, locking onto Vance's hidden gaze behind the sunglasses. "I have a U.S. passport card and a veteran's ID. You are making a mistake." "You think I haven't seen fake military IDs before?" Vance sneered, stepping into Thorne's personal space. "That's the oldest trick in the book. Turn around, now." This is the moment where policing fails, when an officer decides that his authority is more important than the truth. Vance had already decided Thorne was guilty. Any evidence to the contrary was just a deception. He didn't want to see the ID because if the ID was real, Vance would have to admit he was wrong. And Derek Vance did not like being wrong. "Do you think officers should be required to de-escalate and verify identification before going hands-on in nonviolent situations? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below." Thorne remained still. "I am not turning around until you tell me what fugitive I supposedly resemble. I have a right to know the nature of this inquiry." "That's it," Vance snapped. Vance grabbed Thorne's left wrist. Thorne didn't pull back, but he didn't go limp either. He was a solid wall of muscle. Vance yanked, trying to spin him. Thorne barely moved. "Stop resisting," Vance shouted, playing to the imaginary audience, trying to justify the force he was about to use. "I am not resisting," Thorne said loudly, ensuring the witnesses could hear. "I am standing still. You are escalating." Vance didn't listen. He dropped his weight and swung his leg in a hard, tactical sweep, aiming for the back of Thorne's knees. He connected solidly with Thorne's left leg, the leg that had taken shrapnel in 2004. Pain, white-hot and blinding, shot up Thorne's leg. His knee buckled not from a lack of strength, but from the sudden agonizing flare of an old war wound. He gasped, falling forward. Vance shoved him hard between the shoulder blades, driving him face first into the pavement. Get on the ground. Give me your hands. Vance was on top of him instantly, a knee pressing into Thorne's lower back. Thorne groaned, his cheek pressed against the grit of the asphalt. He didn't fight back. He knew that if he fought back, he might die. He let his arms be pulled behind him. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into his wrists. You are under arrest for failure to comply and resisting a federal agent. Vance panted, the adrenaline coursing through him. He felt triumphant. He had taken down the big man. By now a crowd had gathered. Phones were out. The parents of Oak Hill Academy were recording. They weren't cheering for the police. They were horrified. He didn't do anything, a woman shouted from her minivan. He's waiting for his kid. That's Mr. Thorne, another parent yelled, stepping out of his car. He's a veteran. What are you doing? Jenkins. The rookie looked at the crowd and then at her partner. She saw the blood trickling from a scrape on Thorne's forehead where he'd hit the ground. She saw the grimace of pain on his face as Vance leaned his full weight on the bad leg. Derek, we have him secured, Jenkins whispered urgently. Get off him. People are filming. Vance ignored her. He reached into Thorne's pocket and yanked out the wallet. He flipped it open, looking for the fake ID he was sure he'd find. He pulled out the cards, his fingers trembling slightly as the adrenaline began to fade and reality started to creep in. He saw the driver's license. Marcus Thorne. Valid. Address in the upscale neighborhood 3 miles away. He saw the Department of Defense identification card. Retired. He saw the VA healthcare card. He saw a folded piece of paper, a list of grocery items written in neat cursive. Vance stared at the cards. The bolo he was acting on was for a man named Darius King, age 26. The man beneath his knee was 48. The man in the bolo had neck tattoos. Thorne's neck was bare, save for a small scar. The silence that followed was deafening. Vance looked up. A dozen cell phones were pointed at him like a firing squad. He looked down at the wallet again. Get him up, Vance said, his voice losing its edge. My leg, Thorne gritted out through clenched teeth. You kicked my bad leg. I can't stand yet. At that moment, a siren wailed. Not the federal SUV, but a local police cruiser. It screeched to a halt right behind Vance's vehicle. The door flew open, and a uniformed police lieutenant stepped out. It was Lieutenant Mike Reynolds, the shift commander for the local precinct. Reynolds pushed through the crowd, his face pale with rage. He knew Marcus Thorne. They played poker together on Thursday nights. Thorne was the godfather to Reynolds' youngest daughter. Get your knee off him. Reynolds roared, his hand resting on his own baton. Vance, get off him now. Vance looked up, startled. Lieutenant, this suspect matched a suspect. Reynolds was in Vance's face in 2 seconds. That is a Master Sergeant of the Marine Corps. That is a pillar of this community. You verify before you touch. Get him up. Vance scrambled back. Reynolds knelt down, his demeanor shifting instantly to gentleness. Marcus, are you okay? Legs bad. Mike, Thorne whispered. He swept the bad knee. Unlock these cuffs, Reynolds ordered Jenkins, who was already reaching for her key, her hands shaking. As the cuffs clicked open, Thorne rolled onto his back, wincing. Reynolds helped him sit up. The vice principal, Greg Miller, had come out of the school building, now watching from the safety of the sidewalk, his face draining of color as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. He looked like the description, Vance stammered, holding the wallet. I was doing my job. Thorne looked at Vance. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He spoke with a quiet, terrifying intensity. You didn't do your job, son. You did your prejudice. And you just broke a federal law by assaulting a disabled veteran without cause. The fallout was immediate, nuclear, and televised. The videos hit social media before Thorne was even in the ambulance. #veteran arrested trended globally within 3 hours. The image of a white federal agent kneeling on the back of a black Marine veteran at a school pickup line became the defining photo of the year. Thorne was taken to the hospital. He had a torn meniscus and severe bruising to the bone injuries that would require surgery and months of rehabilitation complicating his existing disability. But the legal injury was far worse. The city of Oak Hill, the police department, and the federal agency were all named in the lawsuit filed 3 weeks later. The suit didn't just allege excessive force. It alleged a conspiracy of bias. It named Greg Miller for the discriminatory call. It named Derek Vance for the assault and unlawful arrest. It named the agency for negligent supervision. The discovery phase of the trial was brutal for Vance. His entire history of complaints was unsealed. The jury heard about the fishing expeditions. They heard the recording of Miller's call where he emphasized black male and aggressive regarding a man standing still. The settlement came swiftly. The city and the federal government agreed to pay Marcus Thorne $4 million to avoid a trial that would have exposed even more rot in the system. Greg Miller was fired by the school board for violating anti-discrimination policies and endangering a parent. He has not worked in education since. Derek Vance was terminated. He was stripped of his badge and gun. He faced criminal charges for assault under color of authority, eventually pleading down to a misdemeanor that permanently barred him from law enforcement. But the money and the firings were not the end. Marcus Thorne stood on the steps of the courthouse on the day the settlement was announced. He leaned heavily on a cane, his posture still upright, his dignity untouched. "I fought for this country," Thorne told the sea of microphones. "I bled in the sand so that Americans could be free from fear, free from tyranny. But on that Tuesday, I wasn't a veteran. I wasn't a citizen. I was just a target. If they can do this to me with my service record and my resources, what are they doing to the young men who have neither?" He paused, looking directly into the cameras. "Liberty isn't a gift. It's a practice. And when we let bias wear a badge, we lose that liberty. We have to be better. We have to demand better." The silence that followed his words was heavy. It was the sound of a community forced to look in the mirror. Marcus Thorne used a portion of his settlement to start a legal defense fund for victims of wrongful arrest. He still picks his son up from school, but he doesn't stand by the truck anymore. He sits inside watching the rearview mirror, a constant reminder that for some, the war never really ends. What do you think is the solution to preventing incidents like this? Should callers like Greg Miller face criminal charges for making biased reports? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please like and subscribe. We will continue to bring you the truth one story at a time. Thank you for watching.
Ma'am, I need to see your papers, proof of status, now.
I'm a U.S. citizen. Head nurse at Mercy General. I'm waiting for the bus.
Not a debate. ID or you're going in cuffs for obstruction.
Then say it on camera. You're arresting an American nurse for standing at a bus stop.
The dashcam mounted on the dashboard of the unmarked government SUV captured the entire scene in high definition, recording the crisp morning air and the silence of the suburban street before the chaos began. It was 7:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of morning that feels crisp and full of purpose. Officer Kyle Vance, 29 years old and eager to make a name for himself within the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, had absolutely no idea that the woman he was eyeing through his windshield was not a person of interest, but a pillar of the community. Sarah Jenkins, 54, was standing at the bus stop, just as she had for the past 15 years. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't hiding. She was the head nurse of the trauma unit at Mercy General Hospital, a woman who had managed mass casualty events and trained hundreds of nurses. She was a fourth-generation American born in Cleveland, Ohio, to a father who was a chaotic Korean War veteran and a mother who taught civics. Sarah was dressed in her navy blue scrubs, a heavy cardigan against the chill, and her hospital ID clipped prominently to her chest. She was checking her watch, calculating the minutes until the number 42 bus would arrive to take her to a shift where 3 critical patients were waiting for her specific care. Kyle Vance saw none of that history. He didn't see the fatigue of a woman who had worked a double shift 2 days prior. He didn't see a citizen. He saw a quota. He saw a black woman standing alone at a bus stop in a neighborhood that had seen a recent influx of undocumented laborers, and he decided, based on nothing but his own ambition and bias, that she didn't belong. Vance had been on the task force for 18 months. He was aggressive, often reprimanded for his tone, but praised for his numbers. He parked his SUV illegally in the red zone, the tires crunching against the curb, and stepped out. He adjusted his tactical vest, checked the placement of his weapon not drawn but ready, and approached the bus stop with a swagger that betrayed his youth and his arrogance. Sarah heard the heavy boots on the pavement and turned her head slightly. She saw the uniform, the bold police patch that ICE agents often wear to project authority, and the aggressive stance. She didn't flinch. She had raised 3 sons in America. She knew exactly how to stand when law enforcement approached. She kept her hands visible, clasping her tote bag loosely. She expected him to walk past her, perhaps to the convenience store on the corner. Instead, Vance stopped 3 feet in front of her, blocking her view of the street. "Ma'am," he said, his voice loud enough to startle a few pigeons nearby. "I need to see your papers regarding your status in the United States." Sarah stared at him. The question was so absurd, so blatantly unconstitutional given the context, that she blinked. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice calm, the voice she used to soothe panicked relatives in the ER. "I am waiting for the bus to go to work. I'm a nurse." Vance smirked a dismissal that would later be played on loop for a federal jury. "I didn't ask for your job history. I asked for proof of citizenship or legal residency. We're conducting an enforcement operation in this area." Sarah squared her shoulders. She knew the law. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. "Know your rights, or you have none." "Officer," Sarah said, reading the name tag on his vest. "Officer Vance. I am standing on a public sidewalk. I am not committing a crime. I am not acting suspiciously. You cannot demand my identification or proof of citizenship without reasonable suspicion that I am in the country illegally. Simply standing at a bus stop while black is not reasonable suspicion." Vance's face tightened. He wasn't used to being quoted case law by women at bus stops. He was used to fear. He was used to compliance. "I have broad authority to investigate immigration violations," Vance snapped, stepping closer, invading her personal space. "Now you can either produce a green card, a passport, or an ID, or we can do this the hard way." Sarah didn't back down. "I am a United States citizen born in Ohio. I don't carry my passport to the hospital. My driver's license is in my wallet, but I am under no legal obligation to show it to you for a consensual encounter. Are you detaining me?" The air between them crackled with tension. A young man walking his dog across the street stopped, sensing the trouble, and pulled out his phone. Vance noticed the witness but didn't care. He was committed now. His ego had taken the wheel. "Yes," Vance lied, his voice dropping to a growl. "I am detaining you. I have reason to believe you are a foreign national attempting to evade detection. Now show me ID or you're going in cuffs." Sarah looked him dead in the eye. "You are making a mistake, Officer Vance. A Fourth Amendment violation that is going to cost you dearly. I am the head nurse at Mercy General. This badge," she tapped her chest, "is government issued for medical clearance. But if you want to arrest an American citizen for waiting for the bus, you go right ahead, but you better be ready for what comes next." Vance didn't hesitate. He grabbed Sarah's wrist, twisting it behind her back with unnecessary force. The pain shot up her shoulder, but she didn't scream. She gritted her teeth. "Turn around!" Vance shouted, playing to an audience that wasn't there trying to justify his aggression. "Stop resisting!" "I am not resisting," Sarah said clearly, speaking for the camera she hoped was watching, speaking for the young man across the street filming. "I am complying under duress. You are hurting my shoulder." Vance slapped the cuffs on her wrists, the cold metal biting into her skin. He marched her toward the SUV just as the number 42 bus turned the corner. Sarah watched it approach. She saw the driver, a man she waved to every morning, slow down and look with wide eyes as his regular passenger was shoved against the side of a law enforcement vehicle. She thought of her patients. Mr. Henderson needed his dressing changed at 8 a.m. sharp. The trauma bay needed her inventory check. She wasn't just losing her freedom, she was being stripped of her duty. "You have no idea what you're doing," Sarah said quietly as Vance patted her down, his hands searching her scrub pockets. He pulled out her phone and her wallet. "I'm doing my job," Vance retorted, opening the back door of the caged vehicle. "Maybe next time you'll cooperate instead of acting like a lawyer." He shoved her inside. The seat was hard plastic, designed to be uncomfortable. The cage mesh separated her from the front. Vance slammed the door, sealing her in. He walked around to the driver's seat, tossed her bag on the passenger seat, and started the engine. He didn't check her wallet. He didn't look at her ID. He was so convinced of his own intuition, so blinded by the profile he had constructed in his head, that he didn't bother to verify the very thing he had arrested her for. He picked up his radio. "Dispatch Unit 4 Alpha, 1 female in custody, non-cooperative, transporting to processing." Sarah sat in the back, her hands numb from the tight cuffs. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She controlled her heart rate. Panic was the enemy. Detail was her ally. She memorized the time, 7:22 a.m. She memorized the route he was taking. She listened to him humming along to the radio, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just kidnapped a U.S. citizen. She thought about her son Marcus, who was a corporate attorney in Chicago. She thought about the lectures she gave to student nurses about documentation. If it isn't written down, it didn't happen. She would write this down. She would write every second of it down. The drive took 20 minutes. Vance drove aggressively, weaving through traffic using his siren simply to bypass red lights. When they pulled into the DHS processing center, Sarah felt a cold resolve settle over her bones. They had taken her dignity, but they would pay for it. Vance pulled into the sally port, the heavy garage doors rolling down behind them. He hauled Sarah out of the vehicle. Her shoulders ached and her wrists were chafing, but she held her head high. He marched her into the intake area, a sterile room filled with fluorescent light and the smell of industrial cleaner and despair. There were other officers there drinking coffee, reviewing files. They looked up as Vance brought her in. Sarah saw the confusion in their eyes. They saw a woman in expensive nursing scrubs, well-groomed posture, perfect in handcuffs. It didn't fit the usual narrative. Vance shoved her toward the intake desk where a desk sergeant named Mike sat. Mike was 58, a 30-year veteran of Border Patrol and immigration. He had seen it all. He had tired eyes and a hairline that had retreated decades ago. He looked at Vance, then at Sarah. "What do we have here, Kyle?" Mike asked, his voice gravelly. "Subject refused to identify," Vance said, puffing out his chest. "Suspected illegal entry, resisting detention, possible visa overstay." Mike looked at Sarah. He saw the fire in her eyes, but also the calm. He saw the hospital badge. "Ma'am?" Mike asked. "I am Sarah Jenkins," she said clearly. "I am a United States citizen. I was kidnapped from a bus stop by this officer while on my way to work at Mercy General Hospital. I have my driver's license, my hospital credentials, and my voter registration card in my wallet, which Officer Vance seized but refused to look at." The room went silent. The hum of the computer fans seemed to get louder. Mike looked at Vance. "You didn't check her wallet?" Vance scoffed. "She was non-compliant, Mike. She started quoting the Fourth Amendment. You know the type. Usually means they're hiding something." Mike didn't answer. He reached for the plastic bag Vance had thrown on the counter. He opened it and pulled out Sarah's wallet. It was a nice wallet, leather well worn. He flipped it open. The first thing he saw was a California Real ID with a gold star in the corner. Sarah Louise Jenkins, Born Cleveland, Ohio. He pulled it out. He checked the hologram. It was real. He dug deeper. A folded paper, her voter registration card. A membership card for the American Nurses Association. A debit card from a major bank. Mike felt a pit open in his stomach. He looked up at Vance, his expression turning from weary to horrified. "Kyle," Mike said, his voice low. "Did you run her name?" "System was slow," Vance lied. "I figured I'd do it here." "She's American, you idiot," Mike whispered, but in the silence of the room it sounded like a shout. "She's not just a citizen. She's got a real ID. She's a head nurse." Vance's face went pale, then red. "She could be using fraudulent docs. The behavior was suspicious." "The behavior?" Sarah cut in. "You mean waiting for the bus, or asking you for your probable cause?" Mike stood up. He walked around the desk. He didn't look at Vance. He looked at Sarah. "Uncuff her. Now." Vance hesitated. "Sarge, if we uncuff her without processing—" "Uncuff her!" Mike roared. The sound bounced off the concrete walls. Vance fumbled for his keys. His hands were shaking. He unlocked the cuffs. Sarah rubbed her wrists. There were deep red, angry marks where the metal had dug in. She didn't say thank you. She looked at Mike. "I want a supervisor. The field director. Now." "Ma'am, we can resolve this." Vance started. "You remain silent," Sarah commanded. She didn't shout, but her voice had the authority of a woman who told surgeons when to cut. Vance snapped his mouth shut. Mike was already on the phone. "Get the director down here. Yes, now. We have a situation. Capital S." The minutes that followed were excruciating for the officers. Sarah stood in the center of the room. She refused to sit. She refused water. She just stood there, rubbing her wrists, staring at the Great Seal of the United States on the wall. 5 minutes later, Field Director Thomas Reynolds burst through the doors. He was a man in a suit who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He took one look at Sarah, one look at the shame-faced Vance, and he knew. "Ms. Jenkins," Reynolds said, approaching her with his hands up in a gesture of surrender. "I am Director Reynolds. I am incredibly sorry for this misunderstanding. We are going to get you a car to take you to work immediately. We will expunge the arrest record. This was a terrible mistake." Sarah looked at him. "Dad, a mistake is forgetting your keys, Director. This was a violation of my civil rights, false imprisonment, and assault. And I'm not going anywhere until I have copies of the incident report, the body cam footage log, and the dash cam footage preserved." Reynolds blinked. "Ma'am, we can't release evidence without a subpoena." "Then I suggest you prepare for one," Sarah said. "Because my son is an attorney, and by the time I get to the hospital, he will have filed an emergency injunction to preserve every second of tape you have. If 1 minute of that footage goes missing, I will own this building." She turned to Vance. He was staring at his boots. "Look at me," she said. Vance looked up. He looked like a child caught stealing. "You saw a black woman, and you turned off your brain. You assumed I was less than you. You assumed I had no rights. You were wrong, and I am going to make sure you never wear a badge again." Sarah accepted the ride to the hospital, but not in a police car. She demanded a town car service billed to the agency. She arrived at work 2 hours late. She walked into the trauma unit. Her wrists bruised her spirit, furious. She worked her shift. She saved lives. And on her breaks, she documented everything. The lawsuit was filed 4 days later. Jenkins versus Vance et al. It wasn't just a complaint. It was a manifesto. It listed 7 constitutional violations. It cited Terry versus Ohio and United States versus Brignoni-Ponce. It demanded jury trial. The Department of Justice tried to settle immediately. They offered $500,000. Sarah's lawyer, a shark named David Sterling, who specialized in 1983 civil rights claims, laughed at them. "My client was kidnapped by the federal government. Sterling told the press. She doesn't want $500,000. She wants justice. The video from the bystander across the street hit the internet the same week. It was titled, "Nurse versus ICE." It showed Sarah dignified and calm being manhandled by Vance. It showed the moment the cuffs clicked. It showed the bus leaving. The views skyrocketed. 2 million, 5 million, 10 million. The comments section was a war zone, but the overwhelming sentiment was rage. People shared their own stories. Nurses posted photos of themselves in scrubs with the hashtag not suspicious. The discovery phase of the lawsuit was brutal for the agency. Sterling subpoenaed Vance's disciplinary records. They found a pattern. Vance had stopped 42 people in the last year. 38 were Hispanic or black. Only 3 had resulted in valid arrests. The rest were catch-and-release harassment. He was a predator with a badge, and his supervisors had looked the other way because he met quotas. The agency had known. That was the key. They had known he was profiling, and they had promoted him. The trial took place 18 months later in a federal district court. The courtroom was packed. Sarah sat at the plaintiff's table wearing her Sunday best, looking every inch the matriarch she was. Vance sat with the defense, looking smaller, younger, and terrified. When Sarah took the stand, you could hear a pin drop. She described the fear not for herself, but for the country. "I was born here," she told the jury, her voice trembling slightly for the first time. "My father fought for this country. I save American lives every day, and in that moment none of it mattered. To him, I was just a body to be processed. If it can happen to me in my uniform on my way to serve my community, it can happen to anyone." The defense tried to argue qualified immunity. They tried to argue that Vance made an honest mistake of fact. But the video destroyed them. The dashcam footage which Sarah had ensured was preserved showed Vance's aggressive approach. It recorded the audio clearly. It captured his sneer. It captured Sarah offering her ID and him refusing it. There was no mistake. It was willful. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman, a retired schoolteacher, read the verdict with a steady voice. They found for the plaintiff on all counts: unlawful seizure, excessive force, false arrest, violation of equal protection. Then came the numbers. Compensatory damages $1.8 million for the trauma, the injury to her wrists, and the violation of her rights. But it was the punitive damages that made the courtroom gasp. The jury wanted to send a message. They awarded $5 million in punitive damages against the agency and the officer personally, though the agency would indemnify him. Total verdict, $6.8 million. It was one of the largest individual awards for an unlawful stop in the district's history. Sarah closed her eyes and let out a breath she felt she had been holding for nearly 2 years. It wasn't about the money. It was about the statement. The aftermath was swift. Kyle Vance was terminated 3 weeks after the verdict. The sheer size of the payout and the public embarrassment made him a liability the agency could no longer protect. He was stripped of his credentials and placed on a do-not-hire list for federal law enforcement. The last anyone heard, he was working construction in another state. But the victory went beyond one bad apple. As part of the post-trial injunctive relief, the agency was forced to overhaul its consensual encounter policies. They were required to implement mandatory training on implicit bias, specifically regarding the assumption of citizenship based on race. Sarah Jenkins returned to her life, but she was different. She was a hero to her neighbors, a legend in the hospital. She took the money, the $6.8 million, and she didn't buy a mansion. She didn't buy a luxury car. She established the Jenkins Legal Defense Fund for essential workers who had been targeted by law enforcement. She set up scholarships for minority nursing students at the local college. She ensured that her trauma became a ladder for others to climb. Years later, Sarah still waits at that same bus stop. She still wears her Navy scrubs. But now, when a police cruiser drives by, they slow down. The officers wave respectfully. They know who she is. They know that the woman standing there isn't just a nurse. She is a force of nature who reminded the United States government that the Constitution applies to everyone everywhere, even at a bus stop at 7:15 in the morning. This story is a reminder that freedom is fragile. It resides not in the paper of the Constitution, but in the courage of citizens willing to stand up and demand it be respected. Sarah Jenkins had the knowledge, the resources, and the will to fight back, but how many others don't? How many silent settlements are signed? How many apologies are never given? If this story moved you, if it made you angry or proud, I need you to do something. Leave a comment below. Have you ever been judged by authority figures based on how you look, and do you think the $6.8 million verdict was enough to teach the system a lesson? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We tell the stories of the voiceless, the fighters, and the truth. Until next time, stay safe, know your rights, and never let them silence you.